Weiss+Associates presents IRS Fraud and Presumption. We're told in the scriptures at Exodus 20:16, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor." Simply stated, we're told not to lie. However, you've no doubt heard reports that even politicians and government officials lie to American nationals, which is the focus of this video. No one's perfect, and we've all made our share of mistakes, but certainly the vast majority of Americans have never reached the zenith of deception and fraud, as has the national government, regarding the jurisdictional application and lack of liability for Americans with the federal income tax. There are U.S. taxpayers who are subject to the IRC statutes, and this is not the audience we're referring to. However, a vast majority of Americans have, with or without complete knowledge of the ramifications, made a voluntary choice to join the U.S. tax club. With this voluntary election, these Americans are treated as U.S. resident aliens instead of who they actually are, American nationals. Contrary to the Supreme Court's decision in the Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust case, the national government accomplished this feat without providing American nationals full disclosure as to the intentions of what the U.S. Congress was actually achieving. Naive acceptance was the outcome of the presumption created by propaganda via the national government against trusting Americans devoid of any willful and knowing intent on their part to subject them to a tax never lawfully imposed upon the private sector population in the constitutional republic. We'll address the fraud and distortions of the truth twisted by those within the national government by willfully and intentionally misleading Americans in order to formulate their thinking that the federal income tax was levied upon them. For many, the falsehood has been so well established over the last 100 plus years that most Americans are unacquainted with the fraud perpetrated against those who work in the private sector with no taxation nexus with the national government. Here are the pertinent aspects of fraud. 1. Intentional perversion of the truth in order to induce another to part with something of value or to surrender a legal right. 2. An act of deceiving or misrepresenting, a trick. Or 3. A false representation of a matter of fact, whether by words or by conduct, by false or misleading allegations, or by concealment of what should have been disclosed, that deceives and is intended to deceive another so that the individual will act upon it to his legal injury. Consider the following truths. The Supreme Court's Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust decision that taxation on incomes is a direct tax under Article 1, Sections 2 and 9, which can only be imposed via the rule of apportionment according to population. Any attempt by the Congress to levy such a tax upon Americans in the constitutional republic, devoid of inclusion of the rule of apportionment, was held by this highest court in the land to be unconstitutional. President William H. Taft, who wrote the legislative intent of the 16th Amendment, urged Congress to pass the amendment, acknowledging that any attempt to create an income tax must include the rule of apportionment. He performed a workaround, framing the new proposal as a tax upon the national government itself. He referred to a tax aimed at those who work for the national government or use some type of federal property, which are both privileges. Now we see IRS propaganda and fraud that emanates from IRS Publication 2105. 1. The United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 states, "The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States." This section doesn't deal with income taxation or direct taxation as did the Pollock decision. Thus, it's a type of misdirection to infer association with the income tax. There are plenty of other taxes which can fund these endeavors. 2. The 16th Amendment to the Constitution states, "The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes, from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration." Notice by the wording the avoidance of the rule of apportionment requirement. There has to be 2 United States jurisdictions in order for the 16th Amendment not to violate the Pollock decision, and it's this second jurisdiction that's being addressed. The states referenced describe the District of Columbia and U.S. territories, known as states of the United States. And 3, Congress used the power granted by the Constitution in 16th Amendment and made laws requiring all individuals pay tax. The federal income tax laws are only levied upon the national government per the legislative intent of the 16th Amendment. The geographical or territorial jurisdiction of the national government is where the federal income tax is only law. As to the second part of the statement, the wording is obviously deceptive, as we all pay tax of some sort, but there is no law requiring every human pay income tax. Most Americans realize that the District of Columbia is not a state of the Union and never can be, as it's a federal territory reserved for the seat of government. An interesting parallel is the fact that the government calls this geographical jurisdiction the United States, which is intentionally used to create confusion in the minds of Americans who don't dwell daily on matters related to legalese. The IRS then continues on its propaganda journey to draw the unaware into the wrong conclusion by its addressing those Americans living and working in the constitutional republic within private sector employment. The entire dialogue by the IRS fails to even acknowledge the separation and distinction of the constitutional republic in its propaganda to Americans. Fraud must be proved by showing that the IRS actions involve 5 separate elements. 1. A false statement of a material fact. It should also substantially affect a person's decision to enter into a contract or pursue a certain course of action. A false statement of fact that doesn't bear on the disputed transaction won't be considered fraudulent. 2. Knowledge on the part of the IRS that the statement is untrue. To be fraudulent, a false statement must be made with the intent to deceive the victim. This is perhaps the easiest element to prove once falsity and materiality are proved, because most material false statements are designed to mislead. The U.S. Congress knew full well the intention of the Pollock decision. 3. Intent on the part of the defendant to deceive the alleged victim. The statute 26 CFR section 1.871-1A shows this. 4. Justifiable reliance by the alleged victim on the statement. The victim's reliance on the false statements must be reasonable. Reliance on a patently absurd false statement generally will not give rise to fraud. However, people who are especially gullible, superstitious, ignorant, or illiterate may recover damages for fraud if the defendant knew and took advantage of their condition. And 5. Injury to the alleged victim as a result. The false statement must cause the victim some injury that leaves him in a worse position than he was before the fraud. Injury here is in the financial area, as explained in 18 U.S.C. section 1589 A3 and A4, addressing abuse or threatened abuse of law or legal process, and serious harm found in 18 U.S.C. section 1589 C1 and C2. To make this discovery real for you, time is required to engage in your own intellection in order to fully absorb the content and impact that the IRS propaganda has made upon your life. You're a free moral agent. It's up to you to ascertain the facts presented as being truthful by studying the law referenced here. The law is what counts in the final analysis. Many Americans suffer the fear of government and would choose to lick the hands of those who would continue to enslave you, in spite of the fact that the 13th Amendment has outlawed slavery and involuntary indentured servitude in the constitutional republic. Do you live in the land of the free and the home of the brave? Or has that concept of the constitutional republic been tossed into the dustbin of history, and what you envision as America is but a Disney World fantasy? The choice is yours to make, and you're reminded that the U.S. Supreme Court has put the burden upon the American people with its declaration promulgated in the case American Communications Association versus Dowds, where you'll find stated, "It is not the function of our government to keep the citizen from falling into error. It's the function of the citizen to keep the government from falling into error." Thanks for watching. Press the like button if you found this video informative, subscribe to our channel, and follow us on Twitter. Also, please feel free to distribute the link to this video to those in your circle of like-minded friends.